So understanding which groups operate within the business is going to be very important in creating a privacy strategy. Hello and welcome back to Privacy Professional Training. My name is Fumi Obalabi. The purpose of my channel is to help individuals who are taking privacy certifications. Today's review, we're going to be looking into the CIPM, which is the Certified Information Privacy Manager exam. It is offered by the International Association of Privacy Professionals. So we're going to be talking a lot about domain and some of the concepts that I think are valuable for recall. What we're going to be focusing on today is the remember and understand portion, remembering key concepts that are associated with the role of a privacy manager as it pertains to Domain 1. Domain 1 looks a lot at the source of personal information. So in lots of different organizations, there's going to be the way in which organizations collect personal information. One of the roles that a privacy manager is going to play is understanding exactly where those sources are and managing and maintaining them. So let's talk a little bit about what managing and maintaining and identifying sources of personal information looks like in practice. Lots of different organizations have different pieces of social media these days, right? We've got things like LinkedIn, that's pretty popular, TikTok, right? Facebook. If any of those sources obtain a contact form from an individual, the types of personal information that are going to be collected need to be identified. One of the most important pieces of creating the privacy program is defining the scope. So what that looks like in practice essentially is, what is the privacy program going to consist of? Do we utilize vendors? If we don't utilize vendors, then generally there's not going to be the discussion within the organization about vendor due diligence. Every privacy program is different because every organization is different, and the types of personal information that each organization collects is going to be different. One of the things you're going to need to be able to understand is understanding the sources, the types, and the use of personal information. I was originally talking about the collection of personal information via different social media avenues. It's going to be very important in a program, in a privacy manager's role, to be able to understand these sources and to maintain them. Now, how is the personal information going to be used within the organization? That's something that the privacy manager is going to need to know in order to create the program scope. How is the personal information going to be used, or what do we anticipate we're going to use personal information in the future for? Because a lot of organizations are constantly evolving and improving the types of products that they have to offer. So understanding the uses of personal information is going to be very valuable. So it's very important to be able to understand the types. Based on the data protection laws, we know that there is personal data, and then in some geographies we have terminology like a special category of personal information. We also have sensitive personal data in other geographies. The definition is a bit different. So being able to understand the types of personal data is also going to be important in the creation of the program scope. Now let's talk a bit about business model. How is the business structured? Is there one organization with affiliates? Is there one organization with subsidiaries in other geographies? That is a consideration that the program manager is going to need to know because it influences the program scope. And this is all in furtherance of creating that program. You need to have a scope document so that you can identify what is going to be applicable to the organization. Now, I've talked in other videos about different pieces of legislation, but the role of the program manager as it pertains to taking the cert is understanding those sources of personal data. Are we obtaining personal data, for example, from a data broker? What are the implications on the business as its model dictates? And is it something that we can use within the organization? That is going to influence the scope document that's created by a privacy manager. Now let's talk about the structure of the privacy team. This is a very important piece because it allocates responsibility to different individuals within the organization. So I'll give myself as an example. I work as a privacy attorney. So my role in an organization and my role in the privacy team is to be able to explain and understand legislation in the geographies where businesses operate and to be able to give them guidance on what is acceptable. Now that's going to influence a program scope because in some geographies, certain identifiers are considered sensitive. So the interpretation for a privacy manager is to be able to understand what that source of information is and in which geographies it can be utilized. That guidance comes from a privacy attorney. And I think one of the values in being able to understand a multitude of roles is because us as privacy professionals, we generally will work in all different components of the privacy program. And so I think the value of understanding who is going to be a part of the privacy team also helps from an accountability standpoint, because if you have liaison with your security counterparts, you can be able to allocate certain responsibilities to them and be able to document it in the privacy scope document. Identifying stakeholders and partners. This is very important because, as we are well aware, or if you are not aware, personal data is used in every single component of the organization, whether it's the sales team, the marketing team, or the product team. So the responsibility of identifying who the stakeholders are is going to be very valuable when you're looking at different business models and looking at the creation of a privacy strategy. And it's very important for a privacy manager to be able to understand the landscape of an organization. So I think the value in talking about this today is you see that your role as a privacy manager is implicated by every different portion of the business, because every different portion of the business processes personal data. So understanding which groups operate within the business is going to be very important in creating a privacy strategy. Now, obviously, a privacy manager works in tandem with a data protection officer, the privacy attorneys, the privacy technologists. There's a lot of liaison that happens within the groups, but there should always be a document that identifies who's responsible for what and which stakeholders a privacy manager needs to liaise with in order to be able to maintain the privacy program. Let's talk about organizational vision. Now, I think that the exam looks a lot at the creation of a privacy program from start to finish. So there's a lot of talk about the vision of the privacy program. Now, as organizations continue to evolve and grow, the responsibilities that are placed on the vision as it pertains to the privacy program are going to continue to evolve. And it's the responsibility of the privacy manager to continue to maintain internal documentation that dictates the vision of the organization. Now, there's going to be different influences on the vision, especially related to legislation, whether new and existing or old legislation that an organization needs to be able to have their privacy attorneys explain and provide guidance to the privacy manager in order for them to understand what the program is going to consist of and how to create awareness both internally and externally. So let's talk a little bit about internal and external awareness. So the internal awareness that needs to be brought is in relation to the employees who are working day to day on personal data. So there's a lot of internal documentation that is created as it relates to personal data. And this again goes back into business model. What type of business is it? I'll use the examples again of the product team and the sales team. The product team are the ones that develop the different products that are sold to consumers. The role of sales is going to be bringing in more customers. So the role of the product team is not to bring in customers. The role of the product team is to develop and to improve the products of the organization. How the product team is going to use personal data is going to be very different to how the sales team uses personal data. So it is going to be the responsibility of the privacy manager to create documentation that is applicable to each group within the organization. And again, this is going to come down from internal discussions with stakeholders at the C-suite level or the VP level. Those discussions on how the privacy program is going to be used on a day-to-day basis is going to come down from the executives and then is going to be passed out to the internal stakeholders that are managing the product team and the sales team. And now this is just an example. Now what we're talking about in this video is domain one. Domain one for the CIPM exam focuses on the privacy program and creating a framework. You need a framework in order to be able to understand documents that are going to be distributed to employees and then also those that are going to be distributed externally. I think a really good example of external distribution of privacy documents, you're going to look at different documents that you send to prospective customers who want to understand the products from a privacy perspective. Now, these are gaining popularity in 2026. Customers are very intent on how organizations are going to be using personal data internally. And so the creation of these documents are going to stem from those preliminary discussions with the stakeholders that are internal to the different business organizations and what is acceptable to be distributed to customers, explaining to them how an organization's privacy program is currently running and how they use personal data. You cannot have external facing privacy documentation without having internal documentation, and that's really what a lot of the work of a privacy manager is going to consist of. making those documentations based on guidance from their privacy attorneys, and having documentation so that if there's a stakeholder that wants some certain accountability within the program, they know exactly who it is to reach out to. Now, I think the really important part here is looking at business size. Business size is going to influence the type of documentation that is distributed to a human resources team. And one of the concepts that is going to be very critical to be able to understand is how the legislation in different geographies influences the different portions of an organization. So I mentioned the HR because not only are we looking at privacy legislation, there's also going to be influence from the employment group and employment legislation in the respective geography that is going to need to be taken into consideration. And so as a privacy manager, depending on how you work and in which business organization you do, if you're working at a very large organization and you need to be able to put into place the considerations from different geographies on employment laws, and that is going to be something that is going to influence the type of guidance documentation that is distributed by a privacy manager. Another piece of this exam is understanding the different privacy terms that an organization uses. There's certain terminology that different individuals within the organization should be able to understand. For example, the term processing. Processing is a very important term because it's really important for employees to understand that any operation or set of operations on personal data constitutes processing and is a concept that they should understand when it is that they're building their products, whether it's they're going to be incorporating privacy by design. And privacy by design is essentially a term that lets organizations and different groups understand that prior to the creation of a product or at the preliminary steps of a project, the privacy team should ensure that any design components take into consideration data protection, because as we're well aware, privacy and personal data impact every single component of the business. And so having some key privacy terminology that everyone within the business is aware of is going to be very important. And this really leads into the discussion of training. How often does a business want to train their employees on different privacy concepts? So there's going to be a lot of review for the CIPM exam, and you're going to encounter this in your studies, but it's looking at the territorial and sectoral influences on the creation of the privacy program. So there are different components that make up the privacy program. The portion that the privacy manager needs to understand is landscape. Now, this should be in discussion with other members of the privacy program, like the data protection officer, the privacy officer, the privacy attorneys, and the privacy technologists. But understanding the regulatory landscape is going to be very important. So understanding which regulations apply in which geographies, what sectoral privacy legislation we know about sectoral privacy legislation like the TCPA, HIPAA, the FCRA, particularly in the United States. But outside of that, you may be operating as a privacy manager in an organization that is global, meaning that one, the products and services are being sold globally, meaning that we have consumers all over the globe. Two, the organization is headquartered in different geographies, meaning that there are geographical implications on the privacy program. Or three, certain privacy legislation is considered extraterritorial, meaning that even if a resident is located outside of the geography where they're considered to be a resident, the legislation in that geography could apply to them if they are physically present there. So understanding these nuances in the legislation is also going to help in building the framework that consists of things like the vision, the mission statement for the privacy program, and then also the understanding and identifying the applicable stakeholders for different components of the privacy program. And when we're building a privacy program, we're looking at the different components of the data lifecycle: collection, usage, storage, and then deletion. So we're looking at every single avenue in which personal data can come into the organization or is going out of the organization, and creating frameworks that are going to be utilized by the different respective business units and employees that ensure that the business continues to run. So I really hope you enjoyed this breakdown of Domain 1. There's obviously a lot more detail that goes into understanding the creation of the framework, but I still think it's valuable to start talking about different concepts and also providing examples in order to help different individuals who are going to be taking this exam, because the exam tests in many different ways. Those ways include recalling facts and basic concepts, using information in new situations, right? You need to be able to apply the concepts that you're reading in your books and also in the questions that you're going to be taking part of to be able to identify new uses that relate to certain concepts. You're going to also need to be able to explain ideas and concepts, and that's why I really decided to make this video, because outside of just looking at, oh, okay, this is HIPAA, when is HIPAA going to apply, and how does it influence the privacy program that's being created? How does it influence the accountability documentation that we're creating internally for our employees to see? And then also, the exam also looks at drawing connection between different types of ideas. You're not looking at one privacy concept on its own. You're looking at it in reference to different other components within the privacy program. And it's going to be the responsibility of a privacy manager to be able to understand how these different concepts work together, which is why I give a lot of examples in my YouTube video. So I really hope you enjoyed this video related to domain 1 of the CIPM. I'm going to continue going through the different domains, and we're going to be looking at the manner in which different concepts are going to connect to assist you in passing this certification. I hope to see you in another video.